In this module, we'll discuss the consequences of the imperialist language policy. As we know that the imperialists or the colonizers had introduced a two-pronged language policy. According to this policy, the English language was made available only to a chosen few, and the rest of the population was denied access to English. They were required to obtain education only in the vernacular languages, and the elite were allowed access to the English education to serve several political and economic purposes for the British regime. In this way, by controlling access to English, the colonizers treated English as a commodity. Just as wide availability of any commodity reduces its value, it was felt that an easy access to English language or an easy availability of English language for the masses will reduce its importance or its value. This division between English and the vernaculars or vernacular languages, indigenous languages, or the division between those who used English and those who used indigenous languages was actually planned. And in this way, the colonizers further deepened the already existing social divisions in society. Those who knew English or who had English education were given further upward mobility. They raised their position on the socio-economic ladder, whereas those who only received vernacular education in vernaculars, they were pushed further down on the socio-economic ladder. So in this way, those who had English education were the haves, and those who did not have English education became the have-nots of the society. Those who had English education were the elite, and those who did not were the deprived people of the society. Ultimately, what happened was that those who had English education, the elite of undivided India, they experienced a complete disconnect, a complete cultural and economic disconnect from their own people and from their own background, and they identified more with their colonizers than with their own people or their own background. It is also widely believed by scholars and researchers that the period of colonizing was more of a period of expansion of the discourse of English rather than the actual expansion of English. So the discourse of English as an international language was closely linked with the power that English enjoyed at that time, and therefore it is looked as a discourse, a period of expansion of the discourse of English as an international language rather than its actual expansion. English was also then regulated by its colonizers or its owners, colonial owners, by using linguistics for description and standardization of the language. So instead of getting into any political controversy by regulating the language themselves, they assigned this task to the discipline of linguistics. So out of this political situation emerged this discipline of linguistics, which was given the task of regulating the language. There's a clear dichotomy which is observed and also practiced between a refined language and a common language. The refined language, all the more sophisticated functions are reserved for the refined language. For example, expression of art, literature, etc. All this is reserved for the refined language. And the common language, the vernacular language, it is meant only for spreading sensationalism or for other less important or less sophisticated functions in a society. So in this way, standardization, when you use standardization to distinguish two languages, regard one as a better refined language on the basis of certain standards, and the other as a baser, less important, less prestigious language. In this way, you identify one's place in social hierarchy. For example, those who use the refined language belong to the upper socioeconomic class, or they deserve more prestige, and those who use the less prestigious language, or the language which is used by the masses or a vernacular, they do not enjoy the same degree of prestige, and they fall somewhere very low on the socioeconomic hierarchy. One factor which was responsible for the strengthening, not only the emergence but also the strengthening of the discipline of linguistics, was the emergence of these nation states. To hold all these nation states together, a national language was needed, and to make sure that the language was homogeneous so that the entire nation could identify with that one language, the discipline of linguistics was needed. So, meanings were linked with the objective world in linguistics to make everything look very objective and free of any political intervention. Meanings were attributed or connected with an objective world. This assumes a connection between language and the best representation of the world. So whatever or in whatever way the world can be represented the best, that should be considered the standard. Similarly, meaning is also dependent on internal structures and relationships in a language. So the individuals or the social groups have nothing to do with ascribing meaning to the language. It depends on how best the world can be represented, and the second thing it depends on is the internal structures. So these internal structures, they assume a linguistic system from within which defines these meanings. So these meanings then are defined either by the objective description of the world or by these internal systems. And in this way, the policymakers try to free themselves of any responsibility of politicizing a language, any language, in this case, English. So linguistics also in this way distances itself from any society, culture and politics by not using as a yardstick people or politics or culture, but using the internal structure of the language or the best possible way of describing the world. In this way, linguistics prescribes a particular view, which is monolingualism, and a particular form of the language, which is the standardized form of the language. So under the umbrella of, let's say, linguistics, the spread of English is then looked at as a natural, neutral and beneficial force because it is free of any political interventions. It is completely based on the descriptions and internal structures. It is looked at as natural, neutral and beneficial for all those who use it. So the concentration is only on a notion of abstract system and at the expense of social and cultural as well as political understanding of the language. So you leave all these things aside and only look at the abstract system of the language. However, when it comes to the practical realization of all these claims, we see that language is a simple representation of reality, and the language that best represents this reality is the English language. So in this way, again, English is being privileged by being considered as a language which is most appropriate for representing the world when it comes to using a language, or when it comes to selecting a language for international purposes. So English as an international language is considered the best language which serves this purpose of representing the world, the language which can express the meanings and express the realities of the world in the most appropriate way. So again, English is privileged.